So this is all you've managed? Elsa's voice wasn't loud. That's what made it hurt more. Her words drifted across the room like a slow, expensive perfume, soft, elegant, and impossible to ignore. I stood there, holding the dress I'd spent weeks working on. The stitching was uneven, the colors clashed, and I knew it wasn't perfect, but it was mine. My attempt at something new. My attempt at trying. Elsa didn't even bother to look at my face. Her eyes stayed on the fabric, her expression glowing with that familiar mixture of brilliance and impatience. She tossed the dress on the table as if it were a receipt she no longer needed. The room was warm, afternoon light spilling in through the curtains. But inside me, everything felt cold. I didn't defend myself. I never did. Not with her. A part of me still saw the sister I grew up with, the one who used to braid my hair while lecturing me about color theory, the one who laughed too loudly, lived too freely, and always seemed to be walking 3 steps ahead of me. She was chaos, but somehow always balanced. I admired her for that. Maybe even depended on it. But today she wasn't my sister. Today she was a stranger holding a mirror to everything I wasn't. Bella, you need to stop doing this, she said, gesturing vaguely at me, at the room, at the attempts I made to build a life I didn't know how to start. It's embarrassing. I felt my mother's presence behind me, quiet, worried. She knew how sensitive I was. How hard I tried. How much I lacked focus even with the intelligence she always reminded me I had. But Elsa's tone sliced through all of that, cutting at parts of me I didn't know were exposed. I swallowed the words rising in my throat. I saved them. I always saved them. So I simply nodded, as if humiliation were a language I had learned to speak fluently. But inside, something shifted. Not anger. Not jealousy. Just a small, steady awareness that something between us had quietly cracked. A crack she didn't notice. A crack I didn't forget. And she had no idea how far that crack would reach. You said. The house felt different after that moment, like the air had thickened, like every sound carried a subtle weight I couldn't name. Elsa moved through the hallway with the confidence of someone who had never doubted a single step in her life. I followed slower, quieter, trying not to let my thoughts spill into my expression. My mother watched us from the kitchen doorway. She didn't say anything, she rarely did when Elsa and I were in the same room. She believed sisters grew stronger by sorting their own storms. Maybe she was right. Maybe she wasn't. But her silence today felt like a hand resting on my shoulder, steadying me when I didn't want to admit I needed it. Elsa's footsteps paused near the front door. She turned slightly, just enough for me to see her profile, perfect and composed. Bella, you shouldn't take things so personally, she said. That was her version of comfort, logic instead of warmth, detachment instead of softness. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because I didn't trust my voice not to crack. Instead, I watched her slip into her shoes, watched her adjust her bag, watched the golden light catch the strands of her hair. Everything about her was decisive. Even her smallest gestures had intent behind them. She was the kind of woman people believed in instantly. I had always admired that, maybe too much. She opened the door, hesitated for a fraction of a second, then sighed. I'm just trying to help you grow up, she said. It should have sounded caring. It didn't. It sounded like a verdict. When the door closed behind her, the silence felt heavier than her presence had been. My mother came to sit beside me, her eyes soft and knowing. She doesn't mean to hurt you, she whispered. I know, I said. It was the only truth I was sure of. But knowing something doesn't make it hurt less. And sometimes the deepest wounds aren't made of cruelty. They're made of care delivered without understanding. As I folded the ruined dress, as the fabric trembled slightly in my hands, I felt that same small crack widening quietly inside me. And neither of them saw how deep it had already gone. I didn't realize how much the present echoed the past until I stepped into my room and saw the old sketchbook lying half open on my desk. Its corners were frayed, its pages softened by years of handling. Elsa and I had filled it together once, back when our battles were small and our love was loud. I slid a finger across one of the torn edges. The paper felt fragile, like memory itself. When we were little, our fights always looked the same, Elsa mocking my seriousness, me resenting her for laughing when I needed quiet. She'd steal my pencils, I'd hide her ribbons. She'd tease me for being attached to our mother, and I'd roll my eyes at her endless obsession with fabrics and colors. But always, after the storm, we'd find our way back to each other. A cracked sorry. A shared snack. A secret kept between us. Those childhood wars were messy, but they were honest. Now our conflicts had aged into something quieter, something harder to grasp. Not loud. Not explosive. Just cutting. A single sentence could redraw the distance between us. A single look could shift the balance of who we used to be. I remembered one afternoon years ago, both of us sitting on the floor, surrounded by scraps of cloth and colored pencils. Elsa had been designing one of her first dresses, the kind she claimed she'd wear one day when she was finally someone. I had been trying to focus on homework, unable to ignore the chaos of her creativity. "You think too much," she had told me. "You think too fast," I had replied. She laughed, and somehow, it felt like harmony. That memory used to warm me. Today it felt distant, as if we had lived it in a different lifetime. I sat on the edge of my bed, the sketchbook resting on my knees, and wondered when exactly our bond had shifted, when love had become shadowed by comparison, when support had turned into critique, when closeness had stretched into something thin and fragile. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't dramatic. It was slow erosion, the kind you don't notice until the cliff finally gives way beneath you. And that afternoon, holding that old sketchbook, I realized something quietly terrifying. The cliff had already started to crumble, and neither of us had seen the fall coming. Elsa returned the next morning with the same effortless glow she always carried. Hair swept up neatly, steps sharp with purpose, eyes bright with someone else's world. There was a lightness to her that didn't belong to our home anymore, a rhythm too fast for our walls to hold. I watched her from the staircase, unseen, while she spoke to our mother in the living room. Her laughter came easily, her confidence filling the space like sunlight pouring through open windows. I used to marvel at that warmth. Today, it made me feel small. Not because she meant to overshadow me, but because she didn't even notice she was standing in the sun while I stayed in the shade. By the time I stepped into the room, she was already flipping through her phone, talking about her new workplace, her colleagues, the projects she'd been entrusted with. She spoke in the tone of someone whose dreams had all gotten the same answer, yes. "Bella, you should have seen the studio yesterday," she said, barely glancing at me. "They're trusting me with the pre-launch designs." Her eyes sparkled when she talked about work, about fabrics, deadlines, a city that moved too fast for hesitation. It was everything she'd always wanted, and somehow she'd reached it without ever losing her stride. "I'm happy for you," I said softly. And I was. I truly was. But there was a quiet truth spreading through me, the realization that she had been building a life while I had been trying to build a version of myself I didn't yet understand. "Maybe you should try something different too," she suggested, her tone kind but distant, like a doctor delivering news without pausing for the patient's reaction. "You're smart, Bella. You just get stuck. Get stuck." She said it like a small flaw, a wrinkle that could be smoothed out easily. She didn't know how tangled my thoughts could become, how my mind could sprint and spiral in the same breath, how focusing felt like trying to hold smoke. My mother gave me a quiet look, gentle, protective, worried, and for a moment, I wished Elsa would look at me the same way. Not with pity. Not with judgment. Just recognition. But her world was already too far from mine. She stood on the edge of her future, unaware that I was slipping behind her, losing ground with every step she took ahead. And she still didn't see how fast the distance between us was growing. But soon, she would. "You said." Elsa told us she was moving a week later, though told is a generous word. It came out casually, like a passing detail in a longer story, something she had already accepted, processed, and outgrown long before we knew it existed. "I'll be transferring to the head office abroad," she said over breakfast, stirring her tea without looking up. "It's a big opportunity." The spoon clinked softly against the cup. My mother froze. I held my breath. Elsa continued talking as if she hadn't just shifted the gravity of our home. She explained logistics, timelines, job roles, every detail except the one that mattered, that she was leaving us. Leaving me? When, my mother finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Soon, Elsa said. Very soon. There was no malice in her tone. No arrogance. Just certainty. I watched her fingers dance across her phone screen, responding to messages from a world she was already living in, a world where I didn't exist. The realization settled painfully, not like a stab but like a slow, spreading ache. That evening, she began packing. The clothes she used to scatter across the house were neatly folded into suitcases. Her perfume lingered through the hallway, blending with the quiet panic sitting heavy in my chest. "Are you excited?" I asked, standing in her doorway. She looked up, surprised by the question. "Of course I am," she said. "It's everything I've worked for." Her smile was genuine. Honest. And somehow it made everything worse. "What about us?" The question escaped before I could hold it. She paused. Not long enough to hurt, but long enough that I felt the answer even before she spoke. "You'll be fine, Bella. You always are." A simple sentence. A devastating one. Because she truly believed it. She believed I didn't need her. She believed I wouldn't miss her. But I did. Even then. Even when our relationship was frayed and uneven and full of unspoken truths. The night before she left, she hugged me quickly, too quick, too light, like a gesture performed out of obligation rather than emotion. "I'll visit soon," she said. We both pretended to believe it. But deep down, a small voice inside me whispered the truth. This wasn't just a departure. It was the beginning of a disappearance. The house didn't feel empty after Elsa left. It felt quiet, the kind of quiet that settles not in rooms, but inside people. My mother moved through her days slowly, as if she kept expecting Elsa to appear in the doorway with a half-finished design or a complaint about the lighting. But every time she turned and found nothing there, her smile thinned a little more. I wasn't as composed. For weeks, I kept walking past Elsa's room, catching her perfume in the curtains she'd forgotten to take down. I'd glance at my phone instinctively whenever it buzzed, hoping, without admitting it, to see her name. And each time it was someone else, I pretended it didn't sting. She called a few times in the first month. Short conversations. Rushed ones. "Work is insane," she'd say, breathless. "The kids in the neighborhood are adorable. The weather is unpredictable." Everything she said was a surface-level update, safe, polished, efficient. Nothing about us. Nothing about the gap widening quietly between two sisters who once fought over hair clips and shared late-night secrets. As time passed, her calls grew shorter. Then less frequent. Then rare. For her, life was accelerating. For me, it felt like everything had slowed to a murmur. My own world remained small, familiar, and predictable. I depended on relatives for almost everything: shopping, errands, decisions. I hated the reliance, but I couldn't escape it. My focus scattered too easily, my confidence cracked too quickly. Meanwhile, Elsa was building something bigger: career, marriage, motherhood. Responsibilities layered on her shoulders until even her voice sounded heavier when she did call. She spoke of deadlines, doctor visits, school admissions, the kind of weight that changes a person from the inside. Sometimes she sounded tired. Sometimes frustrated. Sometimes like she was holding back tears. And each time, I wanted to reach through the phone and pull her back home, back to a version of herself that wasn't drowning in expectations. But I never said it. Because what right did I have to ask for anything, when she believed I couldn't stand on my own? One evening, months after her last visit, I sat with my mother in the kitchen as rain tapped against the windows. "Do you miss her?" she asked. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Missing someone is a quiet thing, it doesn't need confession. It breathes on its own. What I didn't know then was this. Her absence wasn't just shaping me, it was shaping the revenge neither of us saw coming. It happened slowly, so slowly I almost didn't notice it. A kind of inner settling. A quiet rearrangement of the pieces inside me. I was sitting alone in the living room one night, the lamp humming softly beside me, when I realized I had stopped waiting for Elsa's calls. Not out of anger. Not out of resentment. But because I had finally understood something. My life didn't pause just because hers had moved on. At first, the realization felt wrong, almost disloyal. For years, I had been the sister who waited. Who depended. Who followed rather than led. But over time, my dependency began to embarrass me. I grew tired of asking relatives for help with every small errand, tired of feeling incapable, tired of being the one who needed guidance. Even my mother noticed the fatigue settling into my voice. One afternoon, after failing to choose something as simple as a dress without consulting someone, I caught my reflection in a store mirror. Not the clothes, me. My hesitation. My uncertainty. My quiet habit of shrinking. And something in me hardened, not into anger, but into resolve. I didn't say a word about it to anyone. Especially not to Elsa. While she was overseas juggling deadlines and children and a life far more complex than mine, I began making small, deliberate shifts. Choosing my own clothes. Learning to manage errands independently. Organizing my days with the discipline I had always admired in others. At first it was messy. Then it became manageable. Eventually, it became natural. My mother noticed before I did. "You're changing," she said one morning as I prepared breakfast without asking for help. Her smile was soft, proud, curious. "I think I finally am," I replied. I didn't tell her that beneath the calm exterior, a new clarity was forming inside me, a clarity sharp enough to change everything. Because as I grew steadier here, Elsa was unraveling there. Her exhaustion slipped into her voice more often. Her messages came fraught with stress, frustration, overwhelm. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel smaller than her. I felt parallel. Balanced. I didn't resent her success anymore. I didn't resent her distance. I didn't resent her criticisms from years ago. But I hadn't forgiven them either. Not yet. Because this new version of me, quiet, composed, controlled, was about to confront a truth neither of us had ever spoken. And when that truth surfaced, it would change our story forever. Elsa called again on a cold evening in late autumn, a rushed, breathless call that sounded more like a distress signal than a conversation. I was slicing vegetables in the kitchen, the knife tapping a steady rhythm against the board, when her name lit up my phone. For a moment, I just stared at it. When I finally answered, her voice cracked around the edges. "Bella, it's been a nightmare here. Work's piling up, the kids are sick again, and I..." She inhaled sharply. "I just need a little help handling things from your side. Can you manage a few things for me? I don't have anyone else." It was the first time she'd ever said those words to me. I don't have anyone else. In the past, I would have jumped in, eager to prove I was useful, desperate for a scrap of closeness. But I wasn't the same Bella anymore, not the dependent one, not the one who needed Elsa's approval to breathe. "I can help," I said calmly. "Tell me what you need." Her relief was immediate, and revealing. She listed task after task, paperwork for the family house, documents she had neglected overseas, financial matters tied to our parents. Things she had once assumed I couldn't handle. Things she had always taken charge of, partly out of love, partly out of habit. But now, she needed me. And suddenly, the balance between us shifted without either of us naming it. I completed everything she asked, quietly, precisely, without fanfare. I learned the systems. I spoke to officials. I kept records. I became fluent in the responsibilities she once wielded effortlessly. Over the next few months, Elsa leaned on me more. A few calls a week. Then several. Then daily. Her life overseas was unraveling under pressure, health issues, work demands, endless responsibilities. She sounded thinner, stretched, worn. Her once glowing confidence had dulled into something heavier. Meanwhile, my control over the matters back home grew. Not dominance, just quiet, undeniable competence. A competence she had never bothered to look for in me. And with every form I signed, every detail I managed, every decision I made on behalf of our family, I realized something startling. I wasn't just helping her. I was becoming the gatekeeper of everything she had left behind. And she still didn't see it. But soon, she would, and the moment she did, nothing between us would ever be the same. You said. It was a Tuesday morning when the call came, unexpected, shaky, urgent. Elsa's name appeared on my screen again, but this time, something about it felt different. Heavy. I answered slowly, already sensing the crack beneath her voice. Bella, something's wrong, she whispered. Her words tumbled out in fragments. The company overseas was restructuring. Her position was at risk. Her health had taken a downturn. And the paperwork she'd ignored, the documents tied to our family estate, the legal transitions, the property updates, had now become urgent. Critical. Foundational. She needed them. All of them. Fast. I can't move forward without those files, she said, voice trembling. You have them, right? You've been handling everything, so. She stopped. Waited. For the first time in years, I heard fear in her silence. I walked to the drawer where I kept everything, organized, labeled, precise. My fingers skimmed the folders. Every detail she thought I'd mishandle had been carefully tended. Every responsibility she once carried alone, I now carried flawlessly. Yes, I said calmly. I have everything. The relief in her exhale should have softened me. But it didn't. Because this wasn't about paperwork. This was the first time Elsa truly realized how much of her life, not just her home, but her roots, rested in my hands. Her confidence, once blinding, now felt fragile through the phone. Bella. I really need you, she said quietly. I didn't realize how much. There it was. The shift. The recognition. The truth she had never spoken, not when she left, not during her success, not during her distance. You've done so much, she continued. More than I expected. More than I gave you credit for. I should have felt vindicated. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt steady. Grounded. Certain. Because for the first time in our lives, she wasn't looking down at me. She wasn't ahead of me. She wasn't untouchable. She was human. And I was no longer the shadow behind her. The balance between us had finally, irrevocably shifted. And the conversation that came next would draw a line neither of us could step back over. You said. The next evening, she called again, same urgency, but softer this time, almost hesitant. I answered on the second ring. Not to punish her. Not to assert power. Just to breathe. Bella, she said, her voice low, I need to talk to you, not just about the documents. I waited. On the other side of the world, I imagined her sitting at a kitchen table cluttered with lunchboxes and unpaid bills, her hair tied back, a cold cup of tea untouched beside her. The image felt unfamiliar. Elsa was always composed, always polished. But tonight, she sounded undone. I know I wasn't present, she began. Her pauses were small but sincere. I kept thinking I had time to come back, to make things right. But life became complicated. And I kept choosing work. And then the kids. And then exhaustion. She laughed weakly, a brittle, self-conscious sound. I didn't mean to leave you with all this. I didn't mean to disappear. Her voice cracked. Not out of guilt. Out of truth. For years, I had built quiet walls around the spaces her absence left behind. I had grown inside those walls, learned to stand on my own, learned to move without waiting for her shadow to guide me. And now, she was finally seeing the weight of what she'd put down. I took a slow breath. Elsa, I said, calm and steady, do you know what hurt the most? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. It wasn't that you left, I continued. It was that you thought I wouldn't feel it. That I wouldn't break. That I was someone who didn't need anyone. The silence on the line deepened. Not empty, charged. I was wrong, she whispered. About you. About a lot of things. A quiet acknowledgement. A fragile offering. I walked to the window, watching evening settle over our street, the soft blur of headlights, the hush of dusk. You were, I said gently. But we can only fix what we're willing to see. Her breathing trembled. Not because I had scolded her. But because I hadn't shouted, hadn't accused, hadn't thrown the past at her feet. The calmness was the truth she wasn't ready for. The steadiness was the part of me she had overlooked for years. Bella, she began, voice thin with anticipation. What does this mean for us? It was a question she should have asked a decade ago. And my answer would decide the path we took from here, together or apart. I didn't answer her right away. Not because I wanted her to wait. But because the question deserved more than a reaction. Across the ocean, I could hear her breathing, thin and uneven. Years ago, that sound would have made me panic, scramble to soothe her, to make things easy. But not tonight. Tonight, I wasn't the younger sister caught in her gravity. I was simply, myself. Elsa, I said softly, I don't want anything from you. Not an apology. Not guilt. Not promises you won't be able to keep. The phone was silent. Not the defensive kind, not the angry kind. But the silence of someone listening with their whole body. I just needed you to see me, I continued. Not as someone who gets stuck or someone who can't manage life without you. I needed you to see that I grew, even when you weren't here to witness it. Her breath hitched. I imagined her closing her eyes, trying to absorb words she had never expected from me. I do see it, she whispered. I see everything now. And it scares me how much I missed. A quiet truth, tender and raw. It didn't erase the years between us. But it softened the shape of them. I know you were carrying a lot, I said. The job. The kids. The expectations. You weren't living a fairy tale over there, Elsa, you were surviving. She laughed under her breath, exhausted. You sound stronger than me. I'm not stronger, I replied. Just steadier now. Life forced that on both of us in different ways. She didn't argue. She didn't deflect. She didn't hide behind that brilliant, polished confidence she had mastered all her life. Instead, she asked in a trembling voice. Can we start again? There it was. Not a request for forgiveness. Not an attempt to erase the past. Just the purest question two sisters could ask after years of drifting apart. I closed my eyes. The house was dim, quiet, breathing with memories that hurt and healed at the same time. Yes, I said softly. But not as who we were. A long pause. A fragile moment holding its breath. As who we are now, I finished. On the other end, Elsa exhaled. A sound that carried relief, grief, love, and release all in one breath. But the truth was, healing wasn't the end of our story. Because the consequence of understanding was still waiting, and neither of us was prepared for what came next. Things didn't change overnight. They never do, not in real life, not between sisters, not after years of distance shaped by love and absence in equal measure. But they did change. Elsa called more often, not out of panic now, but presence. Her voice, once hurried and clipped, had softened. She spoke about her children with tired joy, about her work with honesty instead of gloss, about her health with vulnerability instead of shame. And I listened. Not as the younger sister seeking validation, but as her equal. We learned each other again. Slowly. Gently. Like picking up a book we had paused years earlier, turning pages without trying to rush the story. I updated her on our parents, on home, on the life she left behind. But I also told her about myself. My routines, my choices, the stability I had built quietly in her absence. And she didn't dismiss any of it. She took it in with a reverence I never expected. The paperwork she needed eventually arrived, organized with care. She thanked me, not casually, not habitually, but with emotion. "Bella, I wouldn't have managed without you." Once, I might have held on to those words like proof. This time, I accepted them peacefully and let them drift where they belonged. She visited months later. When she walked through our door, she didn't stride with that old confidence. She approached slowly, almost timidly, as though she feared she might break something delicate merely by breathing. We stood facing each other. Two women shaped by different battles, different distances, different storms. She opened her arms. Not wide, not dramatic. Just enough. I stepped into them. Not out of obligation, but out of choice. For the first time in our lives, our embrace wasn't a truce or a habit. It was an understanding. We didn't apologize for the years we lost. We didn't dissect the past. We simply existed together, still sisters, still flawed, still learning, still trying. Later that evening, as she sat beside me on the old couch, watching the same neighborhood we once played in as children, she whispered, "I should have come home sooner." I shook my head. "You came when you were ready," I said. "And I became who I needed to be when you were gone." She smiled then, small, grateful, human. The kind of smile that tells a story on its own. That night, as we talked quietly under the soft hum of the ceiling fan, something settled between us. Not revenge, not triumph, not victory. Just truth. And in that truth, we finally found peace. Sometimes the quietest transformation is the one they never expect. And the one they can never forget.